Welcome to the Reology podcast. My name is Scott Johnson. Now, I'm not a trained theologian, nor do I have degrees in theology or the Bible. I'm just a regular guy who loves and follows God, but wanted to know if there was more to what I was experiencing in the world of church. This podcast, it's the collection of a journey to dig much deeper in the realm of faith. And Reology, well, it's the study of the do-over, and it's founded on the philosophy and principle of stopping and thinking, especially when it comes to what I know about God, Jesus, and ultimately, what all of this has to do with me. Now, since writing and publishing the book, You Can't Get to Heaven If You Don't Go to Church, or so they say, God has brought people across my path to talk deeper about what they have read in the book and what they've come to experience for themselves in light of its foundation, which is the true understanding of the word and concept of ecclesia and the true understanding of the word and concept of church. These people have all embraced the idea of stopping what they're doing and thinking about why they're doing it. And of those people that God brought across my path, my guests today are from a ministry established to reaching college students. Tyler Korn and Chris Barron are the directors of the college ministry called Impact that exists on the campus of the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, or UNC Charlotte, or UNCC for short. So, gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, and thanks a bunch for being here.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to be here.
So, a few months ago, Tyler, you reached out to me. A mutual friend of ours had referred this podcast to both of you guys. You took a listen, and then you texted, me to come and sit and have a conversation. And I have been a part of Impact since its beginnings way back around 2004 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it started by, from friends of ours, Justin and Nathan. And its original direction was that of, just a campus ministry. And then eventually kind of morphed into more like a church on campus, of which you guys were both students at UNCC and then members of Impact. And when we sat down, our conversation, you pretty quickly caught me up to where God was leading you both, and specifically that was into a very new direction for the ministry, and which entailed some pretty big changes, not only for what the ministry would look like, but also probably more importantly what you guys would be doing and how you would do that. Can you guys take a few minutes here to kind of talk about the history of Impact, like when you came in, and then to the point of where you guys took over and where you felt like it needed to kind of move forward in a new and different direction.
Yeah. So I entered UNC Charlotte in 2005. I got involved through my brother and my his friend Josh, and eventually my friend Josh Edney. I think it was the second year that Impact existed is when I first started going to Impact. And
Man,
I
old.
really loved it. I know, I just dated myself. But hey, the students on campus don't think we're that old. We ask them all the time.
That's the only thing that matters. That's it.
Yeah, as long as we put a backpack on and
Right.
Yeah, but I loved it. I got to know Justin and Nathan really well, and I loved how they discipled, loved, challenged me, and they really made my Jesus really relevant to my faith for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And by no means was I a great Christian student. I think there was a conversation they had one time. They told me this, that they would never ask me to be an intern, just because I was not of that caliber. But eventually, I started submitting more to the Spirit, I guess. I took my faith more seriously, and then I graduated around 2010. They asked me to be an intern. And I eventually I went on staff up until 2015 when I left Impact to do something else. I started going to, help leading BCM at App State because they were doing a form of ministry that was more aligned with what I wanted to do. But eventually, Justin and Nathan, they told us, Tyler and I, that, hey, Justin's gonna start his church or take over church, and then Nathan is gonna take over or start his own practice and counseling. And they asked Tyler and I to come back to Charlotte to lead Impact, and yeah, and that's how, very briefly, at some point I got married, and now I have a kid. I met my wife in Impact, but yeah, and then I eventually, in 2016, is when Tyler and I kind of took over the reins of Impact. That's my very brief history with Impact.
Mm-hmm. And so that was when?
So 2016 was the first year that Tyler and I were on staff together at Impact.
Okay. So then, from then, like, how long was it before you started, thinking, wait a minute, this needs to change?
Yeah. So it was not until, I believe. So I think the first couple years it was, hey, let's make sure that we don't ruin the legacy of Impact by just kind of keeping the boat afloat.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually Tyler and I had a lot of conversations of how did God specifically gift us to lead a ministry, and what did God specifically call us, how to do that on UNC Charlotte's campus. And most of it, all of it, revolved around what is like real discipleship look like. I think Tyler and I both really valued that while we were students at UNC Charlotte. That's something that we took away as one of the greatest things that Impact Charlotte did for us, Justin Nathan did for us, was the value of discipleship.
Yeah.
So it took us about 2 years, right, Tyler? About 2 years?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it took us about 2 years. Yeah.
2 years to really say, okay, no more sacred cows, everything on the chopping block. What would it take for us to say we are graduating disciples of Jesus that actually have a relationship with God and actually want to love others? And that's when the kind of process began and shifted into a new direction.
So, you guys are working pretty closely together every day. So it's not like you have an office and then down the hall, Chris's office down the hall, or you guys are working. You're pretty much working pretty closely. So I'm gathering and guessing, you can, correct my assumption here, that you guys pretty much, you came to this conclusion, at the same time, not one person was like, hey, let's sit down and tell you something. It's pretty much, am I right in that? It was a pretty much collaborative kind of a deal.
I would like to hear Tyler's answer.
Well, I don't actually. Well,
did somebody say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and have a sit down?
Well, yeah, I think a part of Chris's story is that his parents were missionaries in the Philippines on a college campus, doing what we're doing now, but years and years ago. And so Chris had already been hearing his parents basically chirp in his ear, asking him questions about, what is the gospel? What is discipleship? And so he had this, and that's why he went up to App State for a year too, because I think his value of discipleship was a little bit different than what Impact was valuing at that time.
Yeah.
And so he already had some things that were changing in his heart before I was even in the picture. And when I was at Charlotte, like Chris said, like the most important thing was my relationships that were helping me be a disciple of Jesus. It wasn't so much all the events or all the Sunday service or whatever it was. It was that life on life discipleship that was the biggest difference in my collegiate career. And then when Justin and Nathan invited me to have a conversation about joining staff, from the very beginning, I didn't want to come onto staff without Chris. I knew that if I was going to do it, Chris was going to have to be. We were going to have to be a team.
Yeah.
No matter who else was on staff, because I trusted Chris. I had an idea of the direction that he wanted to go in, and it was. And if I was going to be in ministry, that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't have all the structure and the details in place, but I knew that God was calling me and Chris and I in a very different form of ministry on campus. So yeah, Chris, I don't know if you need to add anything to that or not.
Well, no, it's just, I think it was really, man, it was 100% God's providence that Tyler and I met each other in college. And I love kind of doing life with Tyler. And I think we both shared this heart for authenticity and not cheesiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we both grew up in a Christian, upbringing. And I think we both saw that, like, I don't know, part of our values today is like we hate youth group culture.
Right.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but just like the like, let's just get together and play games and have pizza, and like we won't go into depth. We won't talk about real life issues and struggles.
Right.
Because in college, like, man, our relationship really grew because a couple of us got together and we just loved doing life and talking about real issues and like exploring like who God is and asking hard questions. And all was facilitated because of what Impact was doing.
Right.
But eventually I heard of like student-led movements that my parents were doing in the Philippines, that students were actually sharing their faith on their own, discipling on their own, creating these house churches on their own. And I was really interested in that.
Yeah.
And Justin and Nathan, man, God bless them. They had so much patience with me. They should have fired me like 3 years into when I was on staff, because I really I wanted to implement it at Impact then. Yeah. But it just wouldn't work with two visions, and it was not. Right. I was not leading it. I was just help leading it. So that's why eventually I left to go to Boone with App State, because they were doing something different there for the first time. But so when I came back to Charlotte, I think Tyler knew a little bit of like. I think all Tyler knew was like he was just really good at loving students. He really cared about students, and I think he really wanted students to graduate with the idea of like, man, this is actually who Jesus is. Right? He's not asking you to be guilty or ashamed, but to give you confidence and give you your identity. And Tyler's really good at that. So that paired exactly with what I wanted to do, kind of like just make disciples, right? Just what does it take for a student to love God and love others well? Not because they have to, but they, for the first time, are discovering who Jesus actually is. Yeah. So yeah, it was a perfect combination of, just God's providence that brought us together and started this new direction. Yeah.
And that's, I'm glad you said all that, which I knew you probably would, but it's there's a real difference. And I think that's why, I strive so hard to talk about the differences between ecclesia and church. Not that church is not a bad thing. It's a good thing and it's fine, but it's man-made ultimately, and ecclesia is not. And, the grand plan that God had this whole time that came through Jesus's sacrifice was ecclesia. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a, realizing that God is not only real, but he is, inviting, us to join him in what he's already doing in this world, and which is making disciples and, being relational with people and not just thinking that, hey, okay, well, I said yes to God. Now let's, finish the journey by going to church. Which is similar to what you're saying, is like, it's not graduate students, Christian students, and now they can just go into the world and just go be church members. We got plenty of those. We need people who are going to make disciples instead. So, so when you started really kind of, dipping your toes in the water here, and I mean, obviously, you're talking to your wives, you're talking to your good friends, those maybe who are not directly involved in Impact. So what's it look like then when you are starting to, now we're going to have to implement this. We definitely have to talk to those who are, the leaders and maybe the board or whatever that's directly involved with Impact. What that process look like?
Yeah, with the board, there was really never this, I don't know, a struggle. They've always been great with like respecting us and trusting us and just giving us the room to say, okay, this is now you guys doing what God is calling you to do. Do it. just do it well. They just wanted us to be faithful with what God was doing in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all we needed. That doesn't mean they exactly understood everything that we were doing, or the how, or the why.
Right.
But I think the whole time it's been, we trust you guys, that you guys are living a life with God. And if you're actually listening to him, then he's not going to lead you down the wrong path. And it may look different now than it did back then, but ultimately, like, we trust you guys if you guys are trusting God.
Mm-hmm.
So we've never really had any massive resistance with the board. They've been incredibly encouraging. But when we try to implement these things, when we tried to implement these things with our student leaders then, and that's a completely different story.
Right.
I mean, college students, we're obviously, we're in collegiate ministry for the students, but man, 18-year-olds really think that they know everything all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that.
That was a different story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
Go ahead, Chris.
It's funny, you think that, 70 to 80-year-olds are the only people that, don't want to change. Yeah. So, okay. So the board, acted just exactly like what a board is supposed to do. They don't need to know exactly all the little details. They just need to know you, which is great. And they give you the blessing and support. Your student leaders, not so much, maybe all of them. Maybe you wondered, did you have any that was like going, okay, I'll give us a whirl?
So yeah. So when I was at App State, it was the first year. When I joined, it was the first year that they cut the big gathering. And at that point, the BCM over there, I think they had like 100 students or something. And then my first semester there, they right before the spring semester ended, they said, hey, next year there's no gathering, and that's how the year ended.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 people returned to BCM, and that whole year it was just putting out dumpster fire after dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Because they kind of dropped the bomb. So I took that experience and said, hey, let's not just rip the Band-Aid off. What if we slowly kind of implemented or started throwing out verses and go in the direction of what does it look like if the gathering isn't the main thing? What does it look like if you have the Holy Spirit, you're capable, you're equipped and empowered to disciple your friends, or just honestly have a deep conversation with your friend because you love them? That everything doesn't have to go through the institution of impact. So we were trying to unravel it slowly. We had about how many leaders, Tyler? Like 10?
Yeah, I think
at that point
that summer with I don't know, like 6 returning leaders and 4 new ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So about 10.
Mm-hmm.
And man, it went horribly. It was week after week, just them saying, but why are we getting rid of the gathering? But why are we having all the lights on at the gathering? Why are we having all these it just, they couldn't understand that we just wanted them to know that, hey, you have been empowered and equipped by the Holy Spirit. That we're not asking you to be a leader at the gathering. We're asking you to be a leader outside the gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one by one, they kind of just quit.
Wow.
And we weren't asking them to do anything crazy.
Right.
Looking back, Tyler can speak on this in a second. We're constantly saying, are we crazy? Are we incapable of communicating simple vision?
Yeah.
It was really, really hard.
Yeah. And we haven't really talked about this yet, but it is it's going to look different, obviously. And you just said it, no gathering, which is obviously, you guys didn't have it on Sunday morning, but it's it would be equivalent to the typical Sunday morning worship service where, you sing some songs and then someone teaches for 30, 40 minutes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So the main, one of the main changes is we're not going to do that anymore. That exactly. I saw. Are you going to? You're doing have some sort of gathering or no? What does that look like?
So when we started to it all goes back to like us using different language with the leaders, and it also goes back to us challenging them to what Chris said, like, you are equipped with the Holy Spirit,
right?
Like, you can do this. You can disciple your friends and share the gospel with your friends, with your roommates, with your classmates, with the people that you just live life with. That is not the staff responsibility.
Yeah.
If you are a Christian, you are a disciple.
Right.
And this is what discipleship is. This is what disciples do. It was from that moment, that's when it got really, really hard. That's when students started to push back. And I don't blame them, because their entire life, they've been taught, being a Christian, I can just go to church and do the things, and I can put the Christian hat on when I want to and take it off whenever I want to. But we ask students, okay, if that's what a Christian is, what is a disciple? And they say, oh, well, a disciple is somebody that's really committed. They really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that was really eye-opening for us.
Yeah.
That Christians don't consider themselves to be disciples.
Yeah.
That was like shocking to us.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, like, we were always going to be swimming uphill. Every single conversation that we had about, this is how we're going to disciple you guys, so you can disciple your friends. Pushback. This is how we're going to train you guys just to share a simple gospel story from Scripture and how that applies to your life. Pushback.
Yeah.
And that's once we started doing those things, students and student leaders started to either quit or not to show up to things. And so we started that first semester, after using that language with our student leaders, we had the gathering. But it looked different.
Looked way different,
because we weren't considering that to be like the front door of what we did.
Right.
Discipleship is now the front door of what we do.
Right.
Students asking their friends if they're Christians or if they know Jesus, that's the front door. And so we started the gathering for that first semester with praying for our campus, with talking about what the gospel is and how we're going to approach our friends with the gospel. And you would think that Christians would say, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
But the students that were coming to the gathering, like, they didn't want it for whatever reason.
Right.
So we did start with the gathering. But I think the last gathering of the semester, Chris, there was like, I don't know, 6 guys there.
Yeah, six dudes showed up.
And we started the semester with like, I don't know, 45 students in a small room, which is not a ton.
Right.
But starting with 45, and we see 45 students in there, and just naturally it's like, okay, great. This is like a great base to start off of. But then like,
and you're like,
okay,
nope.
leaders are starting to quit. Nobody's showing up to the gospel. It's just these guys now. And so, like you said before, Scott, we start to ask ourselves, are we crazy?
Yeah.
Like, is this really what we're supposed to be doing?
Yep.
Is this what God is actually telling us to do? Man, but we always went back to Scripture and said, okay, if this is true, God, how are you directing us to do this on campus? And we still felt like God was calling us to do these things that we're still doing now. And we even had, the board was great. Our wives were obviously amazing, great encouragers. And we had, alumni and some students that when we had these conversations, they were like, yes, this makes sense to us. But it was few and far between.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. It's funny because I in the book I read a book that I mentioned in my book, and it's called Jim and Casper Go to Church. And if you've not read it before you're listening to this, you need to go out and get it, because it's super eye-opening as far as like someone else's perspective on what we're doing, every week, which is like, the church never, apparently wants anybody else's opinion about what they're doing every week. Every other business and a nonprofit organization in the known world does. But anyway, but it's basically, this guy, Jim, is taking this atheist with him around to like 10 mega churches in the United States. And it's like, tell me what you thought. And his thoughts are exactly the same for every one of them, except for one church. And it's considered a mega church, just simply because it is a church, but their front door is not a service at all. It's like, just one of the many things they do. And it's way down the list of priority of what they do. They actually own like a couple of city blocks, and they have this like, their main front door is, going after, the homeless and going after those who are in the margins and helping them bounce back and giving them education and healthcare and just all this like incredibly, unbelievably restorative type of stuff. Right. But they have a worship service, and, they're a mega church because of just the amount of people who are involved in the church. I mean, it's kind of hard to call it a church because it's so different, but they have a service and they literally have about 60 people come to it. And it's so, it's exactly what you're talking about. When that's not the front door, the people who come don't really care. They don't care what it looks like, as long as they're able to come and share and worship and those types of things, genuinely and participate. We've talked before about the whole youth versus youth ministry concept and how they're drastically different. And you're absolutely right. There are so many youth groups, far more youth groups out there than there are youth ministries, who are just coming to college waiting for you guys to do everything for them. So I'm sure they did buck the system.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
We're not anti-gathering either. It's
Sure.
kind of exactly your story that you told. We want a gathering of people that they cannot wait to worship and pray and hear the gospel together. That's the whole the word of ecclesia, right? That's the point of it. It's to call out people to come together and be reminded, so that they can go and live that life back to their own people.
Right.
And we really said, until that actually makes sense to us, we're not going to force people to come in a room and feel awkward as they sing, because we're not allowed to have amps on campus. And before, there was always this awkwardness. How do we get over this awkwardness of people worshiping without an amp? They hear their own voice.
Okay.
Well, what if we were actually so excited to be with each other? That is not the first thought.
Yeah.
Right? The first thought is I can't wait to worship with my brothers and sisters on campus.
Right.
Until that made sense, we were going to push it.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, it becomes a byproduct of what you're doing. It's the
Exactly.
result instead of the catalyst or whatever. So leaders on, maybe not so much on board, the board's on board. Students, now what's this look like? I mean, you go from 45 at the beginning of the year, you end up with 5 dudes. So what does it look like in the last year or two?
Yeah. So we had to redefine what success was for us. If success really was not butts and seats and how numbers, what was success? And for us, it is, are we obeying the way God's calling us? And for us, that was just having students understand what a disciple of Jesus is, not just a disciple of church or a pastor, but a disciple of Jesus. How can we empower and equip students for the next 40 years after they graduate, that Jesus is actually meaningful enough to them, that they actually have spiritual rhythms where they are reading their Bible, praying and worshiping, and they are actually loving their neighbors as themselves. They actually know how to share the gospel with others. So that's what we wanted success to be like. So what that looked like was that we were just really, we started to figure out how do we define discipleship, and what does it look like for us to disciple people. And it was just, so we started with a handful of people in these small groups, and we just opened up the Bible and said, who is God? Who are you? What are some goals you want to set? And next week get together is we worship, we say, hey, did you do what you said you wanted to do? And go through the Bible and really equip them to read the Bible for themselves and have a relationship with God that's not relying on us. So it was very slow, but the fruit looked really different. It was not sin management. It was not participation. It was very, very eye-opening, because
I'm sorry, I love that phrase, man. Sin management is going to be one of my new favorite phrases. That's great. It's great.
Yeah. So I don't know. Tyler, you want to speak? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really eye opening. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point. When we try to communicate these things with the students that we already had, and it didn't click, we realized that we had to go out and find new students.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
like we, we,
Yeah.
we had to do the groundwork again,
Yeah.
or really for the first time, because we kind of obviously inherited the ministry, and 2 years on, and we were still, reaping the benefits of what Justin and Nathan had already sown. But once kind of God was like, you know what, like these students are not for you, they're for somebody else, and
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they don't like what we're doing, that's fine, no hard feelings. I mean, in those moments, in those conversations of students telling us that, hey, what you're doing is not in scripture, it's very hard to look them in the face and say, I still love you.
Right. Sure.
But once God was making it really clear to us that, hey, you just let me bring you to people, but you have to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've got to put yourself out there. And so we started doing different things on campus. And that's when I realized that I was actually a missionary on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going into the city, meeting with the locals to train and equip them to go back to their families, their roommates and their classmates and all these. That was really eye-opening for me. And so my job description, in a way, kind of changed to not just living life with students, but also it gave me a purpose with the giftings that I do have. And I'm very, very pastoral. But at the same time, I'm an evangelist. And usually those things don't fit together. But in my head, like, I'm an evangelist to meet these students wherever they are, to see where they are in their relationship with Christ, and just can we just take a step? Can I help you just lean a little bit more into a relationship with God? And that's the pastoral role. But we had to start from the ground up. So we started to do surveys on campus, and this was before the pandemic, so we were allowed to approach students without a mask on, without any worry of am I going to get infected. And that was really, really fruitful. Again, what Chris said, it's a different kind of fruit, because now we're asking students like, hey, this is what we are all about. Do you connect with any of this at all? A lot of times we hear, yeah, but okay, well then can we trade numbers? No. Okay, then that's fine. But we are meeting students where they hear the words discipleship, share the gospel, not just want to be a participant at a church. You see kind of like the light bulb flick on sometimes. And that's like, okay, we are where we need to be right now. So the majority of what we do right now is finding these, quote unquote, people of peace that God is already preparing for us. And he's just asking us, just put yourself out there, man, and just trust that I am already ahead of you, preparing the way, so that you don't have to take on any of the, the burden of trying to make it by yourself. I'm already doing it for you.
Yeah. And, Dave, my buddy Dave, and I in the last episode, we talked about this, which it's a reoccurring theme. Honestly, it's control, and when it comes to, and we've talked about this before, obviously, typically in American church, and I'm going to guess in most of the rest of the world, I don't know because I've not been there, but I would assume, the model of church has been, you go to church, let someone else do all the stuff for you because they're the only ones that are, qualified to do that. So the minister / pastor's role then becomes that of, he's going to take care of me. And, the focus is really more on him and less on, the Great Commission, which would be on me, us. And, I think, the one thing that I've thought of quite a bit over the last several years is this understanding of the willingness factor and being moldable like clay. We've talked about that. And there's a big shift, as you said, Tyler, from, being the pastor, typical pastor of, hey, I'm going to, you guys come and I'll handle everything here. And you're taking yourself out of that role willingly. It's scary to do, obviously, but now being able to like go and disciple someone and release them to the world, in our culture, church wise, that's a really scary thought, because most people think immediately, well, most pastors think immediately, oh crud, they're going to go to another church, instead of like, oh great, they're going to be disciple makers and they're going to make 50 disciples. They're going to make 500 disciples. They're going to make 5,000 disciples. And that is a huge, obstacle for some people. Some people they'll never, ever even approach that idea because it's too scary. They may lose their job. They may lose their people to another church, and they like feeling important, and that the focus is on them. But with you guys, obviously there is a transition from that mentality to, it's not about us. It's about what God's, as you just said, God's already doing it. He was already doing everything. He's preparing the way. He's just asking you to follow him into what he's already doing, if you're willing to do that. So what are things look like now? I mean, obviously we're in 2020 and the pandemic and all that stuff. What does this look like as far as the relationship? Because, it is kind of contingent on being able to, have a relationship with somebody. What's that look like this year?
Yeah. So the great thing about what we do and how we do it is that whether it's a pandemic or actual persecution, or if they make laws against Christianity, it doesn't change the way our ministries ran. Because it's so relational. We don't need a building. We don't need $1 million. We don't need $1,000. It'd be nice, but we don't need it, right? As long as we're able to meet students anywhere, everywhere we can, just ask them, hey, like, who is God to you? Like, do you believe like that God is more than just like this Western version of church, or obeying him and this checklist of things? Like, there's more than that. And if they say yes, we want to walk alongside of them and say, like, just show them the Jesus in the Bible, because most students never read the Bible. Even Christians who grew up in the church, they've never really
most
read the
people.
Bible.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, most people, right? So for the first time, they're actually saying, like, looking at who Jesus spent his time with, how he loved others, what he hated, and just challenge them to say, who in your life needs to hear this as well? So because we're not asking people to come to a gathering, because on campus there is a restriction. I think you can't have more than 10 people gathering in a room.
Right.
That is really the biggest thing that's affected us, is that we can't talk to as many random people as we wanted to. But those who already are part of a ministry, we continue to challenge them and say, who are the friends in your life that you need to share the gospel with? Not because you have to, because you actually love them, right? And man, it's been awesome to see some students for the first time this semester share the gospel with their friends, just be challenged to start praying for their friends. It's
to live the
biggest
life,
thing for us.
Actually live it out.
Exactly. To live it out, no matter what external factors are happening in culture around us. Like,
and especially on a college campus. I mean, good grief.
Yes. I mean, there's still, because of the pandemic, there's a lot of like depression, anxiety, and loneliness. We can't have access to a lot of students. That is all real, and it's affected our ability to talk to people. But it doesn't change our ministry. Right.
Which is, and we talked about this, that if you do have a ministry that's based on stuff in the pandemic, like what we're in, it typically has a tendency to like, open it wide up, and to show it for what it really is. And if your ministry is based on stuff like that, it's you can see right into it, and you notice that it is what it's built on, and it does get seriously affected. Whereas like with this, and maybe that's a kind of an interesting thing too, of like, another way for people to disciple others is just being your students being able to listen to someone who's having anxiety or fears or concerns. So, now we got a vaccine. Should I take it? Should I not take it? Those are just the very basics of, disciples and making disciples, living life, talking about things, being vulnerable, like how you guys talked about how you did when you were students,
Mm-hmm.
opening up and allowing life to permeate each other and flow and ebb between each other. So leader wise, where, I know you guys are obviously still in the kind of the baby toddler stage of the ministry right now, but do you have leaders that you're looking at thinking, okay, these guys are going to rise up to be leaders, or what's that look like?
How about you talk, Tyler?
Okay.
Like I'm talking too much.
Oh, crud.
Well, I don't know if I don't think we think in terms of leaders anymore. I think we have a decent grasp on who is in our reach, and who the students that we are already talking to, who they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we really look at leadership now. We really are just looking for disciples. Mm-hmm. And disciples live life with God, live life with others, and at the center of it is love. And I think though it's pretty clear to see those fruit,
Right.
I was listening to this podcast with Francis Chan yesterday, and he said the biggest thing that he's learned over the past 5 or 6 years was leadership is defined by a lot of different ways, but at the heart of it, it's being humble. And I think for us, that's a really big thing of whenever we come into contact with a student, do they already talk about how they already know everything? Not that they get change, and that, it's not to say that they're not a good person, but we really are looking for students who are just willing to explore this idea. Like Chris said, maybe everything that I've experienced before when it comes to church, it's actually not true, or God is potentially going to use me in a different way. And so we have, like I said, we have a really good grasp on where our students are. We know what they're doing because that's what we love to talk about. And we challenge our students too. So we do have students that we work directly with, right? That we are discipling directly. We're in relationship with, but we're not in relationship with every student that we know, because we have other students that are doing that as well with those people. And that's a big thing for us, is we're just trying to give leadership away. It's not for us. It's not on us. And it's really not on our student leaders either. Because leadership for us is not about attending something, being a volunteer, making sure you check all these things off the list. Leadership is being a disciple. And what does a disciple do, right? So,
it's crazy, man, Scott. Once the church stopped actually defining terms, right? For us, a leader, guess what? If you're not leading anyone spiritually, you're not a leader.
You're not it.
Right? That's it. If you're not actually discipling someone, we're not gonna pretend you're a leader because you have this great charisma, or you are always participating, or you're always around us. We can still be friends. We'll still be part of our life. But if you're not leading anyone, dude, you're not a leader. Great.
Right.
And that's fine. That's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. If multiplication, that's what a great churchy term, right?
Yeah.
But if it's not actually starting new things that are starting new things, it's not multiplication. Right. It's addition.
Right.
Let's call it disciple of Jesus, not a disciple of the pastor, the cult of personality you're following. If you're saying that you can disciple people more than the Holy Spirit, that you rather have them come to you than release them to the Holy Spirit, and you haven't equipped them with the knowledge of who Jesus is in the Bible, then they're your disciple, not Jesus' disciple.
Yeah.
So,
and that's
so just
yeah, go ahead.
Define the terms.
Yeah. Well, and that's a whole part of stopping and thinking, right? I mean, we just use words all the time. We don't have the first clue what they really mean or where they came from. We just throw them out there, acting as if that's the right thing to say. But stopping and actually thinking through, which you guys are obviously right in smack dab in the middle of, it's freeing, because you the lights start coming on at that point. You can see things way clearer when you start to do those things. So,
and we by no means have it all figured out.
Sure.
It may sound like we do, but I think we are constantly humbling ourselves and convicting ourselves. But I think the first step is what you're saying is let's actually define some terms, think about what we're saying, what's in the Bible. The first step is admitting that we have a problem. So we admit that there's a problem.
Yeah.
We haven't found a solution,
Right.
right? But we're just like, hey, like let's continue to look at the Bible and who Jesus really is.
Yeah. Well, it's just that you're enlightened. God has revealed his things to you, and you've actually been in the position to accept it at that point and see it for what it is. And he's still out ahead of you. You don't know where it's going. You don't know where he's going, but you know what you're doing. And that's the biggest difference. You know what you're doing, and you're fine with not knowing where it's going because it doesn't matter. You feel complete because for the first time in your life, you know what you're doing. And, I mean, it's clarity, but well, I appreciate you guys, doing what you're doing. As we've talked a couple of times and I've told you, I support you 100%. I love what you're doing. I totally agree. You're right in the middle of where you need to be. And, when you allow God to do what he's wants to do, and it's going to look completely different from what we think and expect and whatnot, but it's going to be way better. So, I'm grateful for what you guys do and that you have the courage to be willing to go into the unknown. And, as we said before, that's why you're on this episode. I want other people to be able to see that it's okay to step out and question. It's scary, but it's okay. And it can lead to where only God can go and what God's doing. So I appreciate you guys. Totally. So, well, we have come to the end of this episode. Unfortunately, I want to thank my friends Chris and Tyler for their time, willingness to share. Hey, if you guys like to take a closer look at what they're doing on the campus of UNCC, you can go to their website, which is impactcharlotte.com. Reach out to them. I'm sure they'd love to be able to share with you and continue to share with you what God's doing. And I'm sure they'd be super happy and thrilled to be able to encourage you along your way as well. I'd like to encourage you as well to be willing to rethink, research, and rediscover the mysteries of God, the life of Jesus, and the purpose of the ecclesia. Now, what I'm asking you to do, it's not an easy task, and nor is it popular. Some might say, hey, just go to church and listen to the sermon and everything will be fine. Unfortunately, that's just not nearly enough. Take a hold of this faith in God with both of your hands. Claim it for your own. Investigate God. Get to know him on a much deeper level, but just remember it all starts with a willing spirit to stop and think. If you spend any time learning about this Jesus in any of the 4 books dedicated to his life in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to quickly see that his message revolved around this very same mindset. Stop and think.